Yes, I'll keep my remarks brief. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here to have a look at the film. I should stress that the film you're going to see is actually a truncated version. The full film is 94 minutes long, but because of the time and because we have a proper debate, we've reduced it to just over an hour. So there's about a third of the film missing. And I'll very briefly touch on a couple of things that are not in the film as a result. I think the first thing to say, though, is that you have to accept that everything you're about to see, the government of Sri Lanka says is lies, and they claim that the evidence is all faked. They claim that none of this is real. I'm afraid that's not the case. It is real. The evidence, which we've put together over 3 years, has been incredibly meticulously checked and put together. When you see things and they happen on a day, that's the day they happened on, as we describe it. The evidence of some of the atrocities, some of the war crimes at the end, we've had independently verified by forensic digital analysis, by pathologists, and this, I'm afraid to say, that what you're going to see is true. And the trouble is that the denials of this evidence, which are so continuous and so profound, are a kind of all or nothing, because, and I think that's the problem that the current Sri Lankan regime, I make a very careful to distinguish between the current Sri Lankan regime and Sri Lanka as a whole, because the Sri Lankan people of all ethnicities are being, anyone who is critical of the government is being very, very heavily repressed just now. So what you're going to see is evidence, and that has two implications. The first is that, as I say, we've treated this as evidence. We've treated it with respect. We haven't done some of the techniques you might do in some documentaries where you might move things around for the ease of understanding the story. This is done. We've treated everything in this as evidence, which we hope one day will be featuring in some kind of trial. And secondly, of course, the other thing is that it's evidence of war crimes, and war crimes are deeply offensive and very horrible to look at, and you must prepare yourselves, I'm afraid, for some very distressing imagery. And the final point I want to make is that this isn't an academic exercise. We aren't just sort of going through some historical kind of records and telling people what really happened for the sake of it, for the sake of the record. This is an incredibly live situation. One of the things that I had to drop at the end of the film, and I'm sure will be discussed at great length, is the current situation. At the end of the war, the LLRC, the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, which was held up by the Sri Lankan government as being proof that it could investigate these crimes itself, I'm afraid has been an absolute terrible sham. It did not address the war crimes and culpability and responsibility for the war crimes. The word crimes against humanity, the phrase crimes against humanity, doesn't even appear in it, and this is supposed to be a report which is dealing with them. It did make a few recommendations. It recommended, for example, that the Sri Lankan military should withdraw from civil administration in a way that which is increasingly involved in them. And in fact, what has happened is that the Ministry of Defence budget in Sri Lanka in the fourth year of peace, in inverted commas, went up 25%. It promised that the many thousands of disappeared, the relatives would hear about that. The relatives have not heard about that. It promised increased protection. The LLRC recommended increased respect for cultural and religious sensibilities and activities. And we saw what happened when some students celebrated Martyrs' Day. They were immediately arrested, thrown in jail under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. The situation in Sri Lanka is getting worse. The trouble is that when people hoped that at the end of the war you might have some kind of hand of friendship or reconciliation, you've actually had the very opposite. You've had increased repression, and I won't go into it now because I'm sure it will be discussed later. And it is an incredibly dangerous situation, and it is getting more dangerous. So in a sense, the need for some kind of inquiry, some kind of judicial process, some kind of justice is not academic. It's about preventing more bloodshed and preventing further repression of human rights. So this is a very, very active and live story. And the trouble is that Sri Lanka has demonstrated that it is neither willing nor able to institute some kind of inquiry into that. So what we have to ask ourselves, and what the international community has to ask itself, is how can the international community do that, and what form of inquiry or judicial process should the international community take to ensure that the people of Sri Lanka are given justice. I think that's it. At the end, as I say, the beginning and the end of the film have basically been taken off and bits taken out of the middle, but I hope it still makes sense.
So that, look at the